Hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall. How you getting on? Thanks for having me on.
Good, Nick. I absolutely love your threads on Twitter, by the way, because you go into so much detail and everything. I don't know how long you spend doing these things. It must be hours on end trying to figure them all out and get all the figures and all the costs. But the government are claiming the EU Migration Pact is going to benefit Ireland, that we've had chaos for the last 5 years, or certainly 3 years anyway, with the highest rates of immigration. And they believe this will streamline everything. They're going to be employing more staff, more reception centres. People will be in. Those who don't deserve to stay here will be deported much quicker. Do you believe them?
I don't think that they're capable of executing on this plan. We all agree that the current system is not fit for purpose, and the EU Migration Pact is a very controversial set of various regulations all stitched together under this one framework. And there's people on the left that don't like it. They say, it's an invasion of human rights at different sections. There's people on the right that don't like it for other reasons. But when you actually look at the detail, like, it is an enormous subject here. But when you look at some of the detail, like, the government technically are correct in saying that on paper there's a lot of things that will streamline and theoretically could speed up processing times and all that. I think that their government are out of ideas themselves in how they can actually do this. So, like, basically, my simple summary here is that this pact is lipstick on a pig. It is an enormous administrative burden and undertaking to completely overhaul our current system, which is not fit for purpose, and it's going to take an enormous cost. Some of it is justified.
I'm looking at the costs here. For example, they say they're going to need an extra 640 staff. Mind you, I don't know why, like during COVID, they just couldn't reassign people who are in the civil service, because there are many people in the civil service not doing very much. Anyway, more staff will be needed at a cost of roughly 136 million, and I'm assuming that's a yearly cost. They don't know how many asylum seekers to expect, but somewhere between 10 and 24,000. The setup costs of the new plan to provide state-owned accommodation centre, 875 million. That's for new IPAS centres, I imagine, larger IPAS centres. But here's the thing: when they produce these new reception centres, is that going to solve the problem of 400 or 500 refugees being put into a small rural town in the middle of Ireland?
No. So what's going to happen here is asylum applicants are going to get siphoned into different categories under the Pact, and one is called a border application, and then there's a basic application, and there's a few other types. But basically, the 875 million you're talking about there for initial infrastructure setup, what the government is going to spend that on is basically 100 million of that is going to be buying City West. So they're going to buy back City West and keep it as a government owned centre. Now, that actually does reduce costs in the long term. But if you actually, this is not what we're meant to be talking about, but actually if you go into who owns City West, the deal that was done there to buy it, to sell it to this vulture fund 10 years ago in the first place from NAMA, like, it's just... and now
the amount of taxpayers' money that's gone down the hole in City West over the last 10 years is ridiculous.
Exactly. So a lot of these buildings are going to be, after, these owners of them have had sweetheart contracts for the last 4 or 5 years. Now they're going to get a lump sum payout and the government's going to buy them back. So that's basically what's going to happen here. And then, that does save money in the long run, whatever. But these centres are going to be more tightly managed, I suppose, and there's going to be stricter conditions put on them for people that are seeking asylum. And it does, like, in fairness, there are ambitions, good, that you can get behind and go, like, we're going to speed up the process time. And
to 9 months. 9 months. Now, I know it's currently 29 months is the average, but 9 months is still not good enough, is it?
No, but there's two types. So the one is this basic border procedure, and that's for people that arrive irregularly from kind of safe countries or countries that have low success rates. So if you arrive from one of those countries, you're put into an expedited process, and you should have your first decision within 4 weeks and then appeal within 6 weeks. So, like, that's something we can all get behind, because then when you're staying in that centre, your movements are restricted, and that's why the people on the left don't like it, because they think it's an invasion of human rights. And when you go through this process, they say you actually never legally enter the country, even though you might be in the country. There's its legal definition. So look, all that's fanciful, good. Who actually comes under that system? Like, if you arrive from Somalia, are you in that system or not? I don't know.
Or if you arrive like many with no passport, no identification, nobody knows where you're actually from, what happens then?
So the details, exactly. The details are yet to be hashed out. But so where all this is coming from is the Department of Justice, Jim O'Callaghan's department, issued a briefing note there about a week ago, which is 18 pages long, and it sets out some, what's going to happen. And again, it's easy to write things down on paper, but when you go to executing things in the real world, it is so difficult. But one of the interesting things about this, and there are a few, is that there's going to be this transition period. So this transition period where we go from the current system to this new system, there's going to be an overlap. And the document says this, that in that time, the costs are going to balloon, because you're going to be paying for the new system setup while also getting through the backlog of the old system. And I don't see in practice that they're ever going to get through the transition period, because it's too hard a task. And so there's going to be hell over this, because as we've seen, other ministers who are trying to protect their own department are giving out. They're saying this is going to impact housing, this is going to impact social tensions, this is going to impact healthcare services, which it will. And now there's the fight is going to begin. But it's also worth mentioning that, let's zoom out a bit. There's so many interesting parts with this. Like, Denmark have opted out. Holland are seeking to opt out. Poland aren't. Tusk in Poland doesn't want anything to do with this. Hungary don't want anything to do with this. So, this pact is very controversial at an EU level. But look at the other side. If we are European and we want European to succeed, Greece, Italy, and these other, Spain, countries on the Mediterranean, which are designated as, frontline countries, they are putting up with an awful lot of the burden. But what I think is an interesting point about all this is that Ireland is a frontline country, because we share a border with the UK, which is not an EU country. And so, we should be demanding that we are a frontline country, and it should be we could have the same claims.
Well, we're dealing with, obviously, people from coming into the United Kingdom through Dover, and then basically making their way to Scotland, across into Northern Ireland, and down into Dublin. And that's what's happening on a daily basis. Hundreds of people are coming into Ireland through the border. It's like a bucket with a hole in it. And we have no way of monitoring that. By the way, we can only monitor the people who sign themselves in at an IPAS centre. God knows how many people are coming through and not actually signing up anywhere, just disappearing into the country somewhere.
Exactly. And so part of this pact is strengthening what they call frontline borders. But they don't... Ireland isn't really considered a frontline country. So, if we're going to enter into this pact, I want us to be a frontline country, and
but how do you solve the border problem? Because the vast majority of people that come into this country have probably been in the UK for 6 or 7 months, or another safe country for the last 6 or 7 months. Actually, I spoke to a guy from Afghanistan who's now living in an apartment in Rathgar, who told me he was in 16 countries before he came to Ireland. And the reason he came to Ireland was because he was left sitting on the streets in Spain, Germany, Italy, and other places that he'd been. He wasn't given the same services and the same opportunities. So he came to Ireland because his mate said, come to Ireland, it's much better over here. And he's now in his own flat or whatever it is in Rathgar, which I'm sure many people would love to be living in. But anyway, the point is, he came in through Northern Ireland. And most people are coming in through Northern Ireland. So how do you solve that problem without having a man standing in the middle of the road with his hand up?
Exactly. So that's obviously very controversial. Now you're into Good Friday Agreement and things like that. So, but we need a border down the Irish Sea. And people shy away from that. Go, no, you can't have that. That's just what has to happen. We need a border down the Irish Sea.
Then we have to work with the executive in Northern Ireland to make sure people are not arriving at Belfast Airport or Larne or whatever it happens to be. So we have to do a deal with them. So they will
Yes.
become our front line.
Like that. It just has to happen. Like we don't want an actual physical border on the island of Ireland. Nobody wants that. So like let's just try and push for a border down the Irish Sea. But there's another interesting thing about this. Something that is good about this pact is that you won't be, if you get a decision from one country, you won't be able to go and apply in the next country again. Or you can apply, but the requirements on that country to accept your application, the country can turn that application around in 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure about that timeline. But the point is that kind of bouncing around from country to country is the goal is to try and prevent it. And so part of that again is updating of this Eurodac system. And that's again one of the costs, this 12 or 13 million.
But the Eurodac system, we've seen the failures of that system, where you've got people coming to Ireland with 20 previous convictions. Only one guy recently jailed who had already been found guilty and been in jail in Britain of rape and sexual assault, and then comes to Ireland.
Yep.
So we've seen the failures of that system.
Exactly. So there, straight away, I'm just telling you what's written down on paper, but then execution is obviously very difficult. But they say they're going to update it and make it better, and when people come, fingerprints, photographs, all biometrics and things like that, and harmonise it across the EU. But then people are like, well, if they're going to do that, is that a launch pad to do it for all citizens? And that's what people think there. But so there's all this, right? This is what I call the lipstick on a pig. It's an incredible amount of administrative, complex systems. We're creating layered appeal mechanisms and committing hundreds of millions of euros of funding. But the practical outcome, is not the practical outcome here is not any way different from what Denmark has already achieved. We should be looking at Denmark, and Denmark have opted out of this pact, and they've done. 2,000 people applied for asylum in Denmark last year, and I think they approved 800 people. And they've done this by just having very strict requirements on what it takes to apply for asylum. And Ireland is in the perfect position to do that. We're an island off Europe. We're not part of Schengen, and we have this opt-out clause that we negotiated through the Lisbon Treaty. And so there's no reason for Ireland to do this. And so the argument for opting in is that no solidarity with Europe and our fellow EU members. I'm like, okay, I understand Greece and Italy are having are at the front line here, but we can support them in other ways. Let's.
And by the way, the cost of also refusing people. Here is the other thing. We have an option to refuse people because, of course, we have a higher quota than most European countries because of our GDP. Let's see how long that lasts, by the way. But we have a higher quota than most other European countries. Now, is it true that if we want to refuse, so let's say, for example, we take 7,000 people in and our quota, let's say for argument's sake, is 20,000 and we want to refuse people. So is it true that the cost of refusing is somewhere in the 25,000 a year per person? Is that roughly where the cost is? Or did I mishear that figure?
No, so the cost is 20,000 per person, which is actually very cheap because at the moment it's costing us 122,000 euros.
Well, we'd rather it didn't cost us anything at all. We'd rather we just be able to say to somebody, "I'm sorry, you can't come in here because you don't qualify." So
yeah. But so that's what countries are going. That's a way out. You can pay not to accept people, but the way this is going to work is not clear. The details aren't issued yet. So people are still going to come to Ireland individually, and we're going to have to deal with,
but can we continue to do that? Look, we're economically prosperous, or we certainly were up to now. That could all change very quickly, of course, as we all know, because the world is changing financially. And if Ireland, of course, loses our multinational companies, that could be 20 billion down the drain. That's the worst case scenario, which would destroy us completely. So we're economically prosperous. I don't know what we've spent between Ukrainians and asylum seekers over the last 3 years, but I'm sure it's somewhere in the 6 or 7 billion region at this stage. And we could not continue to do that for 5 years under the EU Migration Pact if indeed our economy drops.
Yeah, if our economy drops, then it's game over. And that's why a lot of people want our economy. A lot of people are cheering on Trump because they're like, this is the only thing that will fix the spending on migration. And so like if the economy drops, the benefits go, the payments to these IPAS centres and hotels, like we just won't be able to afford it unless the government take a drastic decision to prioritise that spending over.
Well, they will, but they've done that already. They've done that for the last 3 years. We've seen that.
They've done it while they've had the luxury of a surplus. Like all our surplus is going to this basically. Mm-hmm. But when that surplus goes, like then do they make that would be a wild decision. And so it's sadly I always say it's so sad that so many people are like praying or hoping for a dramatic depression to rid us of this whole issue. And I'm like, geez, that's so bad because we've done the hard part of getting the money here. We're a rich country and we're just not spending it on ourselves. We are just allowing the asylum system be abused and we're not making any decisions. Like,
well, I mean, it's huge. Well, I mean, it's not just the money we're spending. It's hugely damaging to our economy. For example, to our tourist industry. I'm going to be talking to Jackie in a few minutes. Who's talking about something that I never even thought of. The show bands of Ireland don't have anywhere to play anymore because half the hotels are taken up with refugees. He's in the Dáil today talking about that. I mean, so it's hugely damaging to our country in many different ways. The only people that are being are making any money out of this, of course, are hotel owners and catering companies, etc., etc. So they're making millionaires out of them, but everybody else is losing out.
Exactly. Security companies, catering companies, and it's all people that are connected in different ways. When you burrow down into it, and it's becoming. We all know this. It's becoming an industry where any kind of cowboy businessman with a property is just lobbing in an application.
Oh yeah, but what they say recently, there's more money in immigration than there is in drugs. I mean, so that really says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, there might be. Yeah.
But wasn't there some research done in Europe that more money is being made currently at the moment and money being spent on immigration than the illegal drug trade? I mean, that's crazy.
Like what we're doing is like when you look up the supply chain, let's put it that way, of people coming here. Like we're incentivizing human trafficking.
Yeah.
And like these traffickers are making a lot of money to get people here, and then these people come and they have jobs, and then they're paying back whatever money they make back to these traffickers. And literally this week there was a Sudanese Kuwait, a Kuwaiti man arrested trafficking 6 people in Dublin Airport. That was just during the week happening. And it's very sad. Like there are genuine asylum seekers,
of course,
in the world. And we all know that, but what's happening is we're allowing the chancers the opportunity to come in and benefit from it.
Okay, final question for you, Nick. You've drilled down all the figures, and I'm looking at your Twitter. If anyone wants to go to your Twitter account, by the way, you'll see you've kind of drilled down into everything really well. But the final question for you, do you trust the Irish government over the next 5 years to handle this properly? Do you think we'll be in a better position, leaving aside the economy for the moment, and let's just say the economy stays the same? But do you trust the Irish government that in 5 years' time we'll be in a better place?
No, there's a competency crisis in Irish politics at the moment. The housing crisis is not going to be fixed in the next 4 or 5 years. The healthcare, nothing's going to be fixed. There's like a lack of ability to make any sort of big decision. Like opting out of this migration pact was a simple, difficult decision to make, if I can put it that way.
Yeah,
but
I remember.
They decided, no, we must just go along with what Europe is saying at all times.
Okay.
And like, look, we like our politicians are basically they're role playing as European MEPs and delegates. Like Harris is over and back to Brussels every day. He's negotiating on behalf of Europe at the moment. Getting a kick out of that. But like, come on, you're an Irish politician. You're representing Ireland.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, Nick, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much, Aidan. I'm sure we'll talk again. Nick Delehanty. Go to his Twitter account.